Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharp. Our headlines this week: 4 federal lawmakers from Arizona, Senators Gallego and Kelly, and of course Representatives Yasamin Ansari and Greg Stanton, sent a letter to Homeland Security Kristi Noem asking that ICE stop arresting immigrants when they're showing up for their immigration hearings. They say it could cause migrants to not show up for court and just keep living under the radar illegally. Headline number 2, a new Noble Predictive Insights poll shows that Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs, a Democrat, has a lead over her Republican rivals in 2026, but it ain't much of one. In hypothetical matchups, Hobbs leads both Andy Biggs and Karen Taylor Robeson by 2 points, but 17% are still undecided in both of those matchups. While no other Democrat has officially announced a campaign, Hobbs maintains a pretty solid net favorability rating of plus 13 among all voters, a decent foundation for re-election. And speaking of 2026, the highest-ranking Republican in Arizona government, State Treasurer Kimberly Yee, announced this week that she is running for Superintendent of Public Instruction in next year's election. Yee is hoping to unseat Superintendent Tom Horne, a fellow Republican in the primary, and go on to face the Democratic nominee in November of 2026. And that brings us to our guest, Treasurer Kimberly Yee. You're making your second appearance on the AZ Political Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for doing this. As you were just saying, it has been a crazy few hours since you announced. You're termed out.
Yes.
From you can't run for treasurer again. The office, by the way, when you were elected to it in 2022.
Sorry.
2022.
Yes.
Yeah, you actually received the most votes of any Republican statewide that year. But as I also mentioned, you're currently the highest ranking Republican in state government. So superintendent's a step down. Did that give you pause before deciding to run?
It's really not a step down. There are constitutional officers statewide, and it is surely a pleasure and an honor to serve in a statewide capacity, as there really are a handful. So one of the things that I just love about our state is every single corner of it, meaning all 15 counties. And as state treasurer, being elected initially in 2018 in my first term, I have been to every single county in our state, and I go regularly because as a statewide constitutional officer, that is my job. I'm not just representing, the state capital area where my office is.
Right.
It is every single family across our great state. And in that role, you really have to be active. You need to hear what is on the ground right there in the heart of what that community is. And I've done that. And so I'd like to continue that work beyond the time that I am state treasurer. And education has always been a passion of mine. Public policy in K through 12 schools and higher education really began 30 years ago.
So I have to also ask, because I mentioned the governor's race that's coming up in 2026, is the fact that there's a full slate of Republicans already running play a part in your decision to instead maybe run for superintendent and not seek the governor's office like you did originally in 2022?
I believe there's a time and place for everything. And for those of us who really feel called to serve in public service, it really is about the job at hand. And I'm, a woman of faith, and I believe that when God opens a door, you enter. And so I do feel that there is a real need to preserve our wonderful education opportunities here in Arizona. And as a mom, as someone who really has been deeply rooted in education policy, I see that there's a lot of work to be done in our great state.
What particular school issue or issues made you decide I've got to do this job?
There are so many. Well, first of all, I started in education policy back in 1996. I worked for 2 Republican governors, and my portfolio for public policy was education. So I am a daughter of a public school teacher who taught here in Arizona public schools for 38 years. So it really, quite frankly, began as a child going into the classroom with my mom regularly in Title I schools in South Phoenix. And even back then, I realized there's work to be done here, because at her little school, at the heart of some of our lowest income neighborhoods in downtown Phoenix, they would have the copy machine wrapped up in tape with a little piece of paper stuck on it that said not working. But while on the same day when my mom went to go pick up her paycheck down at the big, beautiful administration office down the street, there were four working industrial size copy machines.
Right.
Not being used by anybody.
Right.
And even as a little girl back then, I thought, this doesn't seem right. Why is it that teacher who works so hard in the classroom every day with the kids can't even copy paper in their own building? They were also, at that time, teachers were buying supplies at garage sales, and they didn't have supplies in the classroom. That seemed backwards to me, even as a person who was growing up watching this happen. And today we have more and more problems that we have to tackle. Education funding has been around for a long time,
Right.
and we haven't solved the problem. Beyond that, academic achievement levels have declined. We have a growing state in Arizona. I watch the economy every day as the state treasurer. We have one of the fastest growing states in the country, and that means growth. That means manufacturing and building those wonderful jobs that we have, but we don't have a skilled workforce to be able to be on the job with the hands on the ground. So we are really needing to make up time for all of these years.
Is there any particular issue, though, besides just overall making sure that schools have enough funding that they need and these other issues that you've seen since you were in your mom's classroom?
Yes.
Any particular issue of the day that motivated you to run for superintendent?
Well, there are a lot of rumblings within our parents and families, children of those who really love the school choice opportunities that we have in Arizona. Arizona has really been a model nationally for their school choice options. We began back in the 1990s, believe it or not, 30 years ago, when we were talking about how you can really increase the types of opportunities that a school looks like. Rather than just having that standard district public school, can a charter school, for instance, make a difference for a child in that unique way? And so I was actually a staff member of the Arizona Senate Education back in the 90s. I was helping craft legislation, even back in the early days of school choice, about what a charter school can look like. We had something called open enrollment, which means you are able to have your child go to a school outside of your zip code so that you're not bound to whatever that school is within your neighborhood. You can go anywhere in the state that best fits that student's needs. Open enrollment policies have been on the books for 30 years. Today we have other types of school choice options. Homeschoolers have grown in many ways over the years, as well as those who choose to go to private schools or non-traditional schools. Micro schools are now in the mix, as well as tribal schools. There are so many wonderful and beautiful options for families to choose from. And that is something that the school choice community wants to preserve.
So, because I know as you announced for this office, you spoke a lot about supporting the Empowerment Scholarship
They are
account
also called
program.
ESAs, yes.
Yeah, the ESAs. But I don't think I heard your exact view on what kind of limits you would support as far as what the program can fund, because I know that there's a lot of Republicans that have complained that Superintendent Horne, his limits are too strict. Where do you think the line should be drawn on what parents can spend on for their kids' education as they're receiving this ESA money?
Well, keep in mind, this is something that the legislature passed, and over the course of time, it has expanded. So ESA started as an alternative option for families to use their funds for, say, students who are disabled. Then we rolled it out to those who are foster children, those who have military families. And today, we have a universal empowerment scholarship account program, and many states across the country are trying to model their own version of our ESA. What we have are taxpayer dollars that do roll out to those families who have those unique needs. And of course, we have to have guardrails in place, protections, so that we are able to be guided by the funds that are used. But the legislature is the appropriate entity to determine what those protections are. As a former member of the state legislature, I believe that is the appropriate role of where we have those protections.
So the state board shouldn't play a part in it? The State Board of Education? The
State Board of Education is a policy-making body that is determining those types of details, the weeds, all of those types of things. But those guardrails really should be brought back to the legislative process. If you you are talking about the overall program. So there's that fine line where you have the State Board of Education, you have the State Superintendent of Public Instruction overseeing the Department of Education. It's very complicated, but this is how it works.
Right.
And they have their administrative role, just like the state treasurer, as I serve. We have our administrative role. If I choose to go and roll out a law, and I have questions, I'm not just going to arbitrarily decide what to do. I'm not the legislature. I used to serve in that role, but I am no longer the legislature. I will go and either ask what their intent was for that law, or I ask them to please clarify how to roll out and administer that law. That's not being done currently with our ESA program, and that really has created the rumblings and the displeasure of so many school choice families across Arizona.
So, you basically are saying that you wouldn't have that power, but if you were in the role of superintendent, what would you advise the legislature, your former body that you worked with, that you were in? What would you advise them that ESA funds could be spent on? I've heard some people say, oh my gosh, people are spending it on pianos, but other people would push back and say, I want my child to go to the Juilliard, and so I think a musical education is super important. Where would you think the line should be drawn?
Well, some of these examples that you are hearing of late are really, they're examples that make up 1/100% of all total receipts of ESAs. And so they are unique, and I would call them outliers. And of course, you have to take a very close look at those types of expenditures because they are something that would be paid for by taxpayer dollars. So keep that in mind. At the same time, those types of examples are being used to shut down a program that is wildly popular. And the ESA program is going to be continuing to expand as it's working for families. Should a family be able to spend money on musical instruments for their child? It's the same question we should ask a public school. Should they allow for their students who desire a musical education to have those musical instruments? It's the same question. And so how do you define whether a homeschooled child should or should not be granted the ability to have a musical instrument in that home education setting?
I think my next question should be, how do you get the kids to actually then practice on the piano when we even inherited one in our house?
That's great.
Where do you think you can do a better job than Superintendent Horne? I mean, people don't primary somebody in their own party very often. It's obviously not done without a lot of thought going into it. So you have to admit, he certainly has a lot of experience in this job. He served 2 terms from 2003 to 2010, and now again since 2021, the beginning of 2021. So a total of more than 10 years as superintendent of public instruction, and he served for 24 years on a Valley School District's governing board before that. Where do you think you would do a better job than Tom Horne?
I would be present. I would be present in every single county in Arizona, as I am as state treasurer, and he is not. Now, someone who's 81 years old may have some limitations on where they can go and how often they can go. And so that is something that voters should consider, because if the individual who is choosing to serve in a second term will be 86 years old at the end of that second term, is that person capable of doing the job of going to every single county regularly, traveling those miles, being present in so many types of settings? You have to go and watch what's happening on the ground. And we've had some significant issues of fiscal mismanagement in schools on his watch. Take a look at Isaac, for an example. Total mismanagement. And if you take a look at the various school district audits that we see, and they come in regularly, I remember sitting as a former member of the education committee in the state legislature, and there was an audit done of a school district, and they were using, their gas tanks for their buses, as they normally do, right? So there's a little gas tank, the school district bus comes in, they fill the tank. Well, it was an irregular pattern of how much gas was going out of the tank. So upon further review through that audit, they found out that there were private cars, personal vehicles
Oh, boy.
of district personnel using the gas that was paid for by taxpayers. Those are the types of expenditures that we really have to take a close examination of. And you can't be present if you aren't able to take a look at what's happening in every single school district across our state.
So would you say your beef with Superintendent Tom Horne is not necessarily policy?
Oh, it absolutely can be policy as well. Taking a look at his legislative record, he wasn't always a fan of some of the wonderful school choice opportunities that we've had in Arizona. But we have to take a look at what policies are being in place in our schools. And we've got a lot of school districts that are really not focusing on academics anymore. They're talking about social and emotional learning, and we're not getting back to the reading and math.
In all fairness, that's something that Tom Horne has spoken out against as well.
Well,
social
it's still
and emotional
happening,
learning.
and it's now going into a third year of an administration.
Gotcha.
And so you can talk about stuff and what you're against, but what are you doing about it? And so there is a true difference on action and real. That calling is something that I'm hearing statewide. It's happening in local school districts across our state.
Let's talk about teacher pay. You cannot have a discussion in Arizona and education without teacher pay. My wife has been at this for a while. She's a public school teacher. She feels like she's making a decent living now. She's not getting rich, and she always reminds me, I didn't get into this to get rich, Jim, of course. But there are a lot of teachers that aren't making much money. A teacher of one of our children actually approached my wife and was crying to her because she said that as we've seen an increase in teacher pay at the district level, that new hires are going to actually be making more than these experienced teachers. And this teacher, by the way, a divorcee, single mom, who's working 2 to 3 jobs on a regular basis to make ends meet. What can you do as superintendent of public instruction? You already mentioned the legislature has its role. What can you do as superintendent of public instruction as far as teacher pay goes?
Well, teacher pay has been a discussion for so many decades,
Oh my
and
gosh.
we have not fixed the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I say this as a daughter of a public school teacher,
Right.
Who chose to work in those South Phoenix schools when she lived 45 minutes north.
Mm-hmm.
It was her heart that brought her to that lower pay position with considerably more issues to deal with within that classroom.
Right.
And we don't always have that hard, issue when we come to teacher pay, because some people will just say, I'm going to leave this. This is not an industry for me. And that is something we have to deal with because we have teacher shortages across our entire state. One of the things that I have fully supported is increased awareness of what is happening within classroom funding and making sure we have a good balance between administrative funding to classroom funding. And as I gave the example earlier, we have to make sure there is not too much overhead spent at that administrative level so that it gets down to the critical aspect of classroom funding where it touches the teacher and the student for that academic achievement. That is actually done within the school district governing board level. So as individuals go and elect their local governing board, that's where it matters. And there are certain limitations that state entities can have when it comes to certain school district funding, because those governing boards are the ones to determine and rubber stamp whatever budget they'd like.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are certainly things that we can promote from the state superintendent's role to make sure that there's the payment is fair, right? So for that example you used earlier, the experience level should be acknowledged.
Right.
And so if that teacher has 10, 15, 20 more years of experience than that newcomer that comes in and is getting more pay, that's a problem, obviously, because that experienced teacher is going to leave, and that will
But we
affect.
do need to offer new recruits good pay, though, because otherwise we're not getting
Absolutely.
new recruits, right?
We used to have something in Arizona called performance pay, and that's something that honored those who were in the classroom for so many years and had real results based on their academic achievement levels for, assessments and moving kids out of that grade level at the appropriate, proficiency levels. All of those things should be in play. And we really haven't had a lot of that focus on academic achievement, especially post-COVID. If you take a look at what happened during COVID, a lot of kids just they fled whatever school district they were in, and some never came back.
Right.
And even if they did come back, there was a certain level of, they weren't prepared and ready. They lost so much time when they were outside of that classroom. And teachers really need to be empowered as well, right? We need to continue to give them that teacher training and education so that they are equipped and ready, to teach kids who may have unique needs. And so that's something that just from a comprehensive look at what is happening in the classroom, we've got to tackle.
By the way, full disclosure, I know we mentioned this last time you were on the AZ Political Podcast, but my wife actually sits on a board for Treasurer Yee, but it's for the 529 scholarships, not scholarships, the 529 accounts,
Right.
which fund college scholars, not scholarships even.
They're scholars.
Just funds.
Sure,
Okay, all right. It funds the scholars, but it funds college education for kids in Arizona, which I think it's a really cool deal. So. I just want to make sure everybody knows that, she
I have
knows
to
my
put
wife.
a plug in, though, because we met at an education-related conference on STEM. And as you know, I've been a longtime supporter of science, technology, and education in our classroom. And we really need to focus on things like that as well, because if you look at a growing state like Arizona, it matters what type of education we are leading our young children into, because these technologies, they are changing every day. We have growing economies in Arizona, and if we don't educate our kids to be skilled in the trades and in vocational education, even beyond college and university education, we won't be ready for that growth in Arizona. We have an example in North Phoenix. We have a huge manufacturing, organization being built, and they're 2 years delayed from opening day because they didn't have enough workers, skilled trade
Right.
people, welders, those who are able to, be on the ground with their hands ready. We didn't have that in preparation for that big opportunity. And if we continue that, we won't get these types of jobs in the future. They will go to another state because they will be prepared.
Does there need to be less of an emphasis on going to college?
I believe that we should emphasize both equally. And you have seen that in my time as treasurer. I really strongly believe that vocational education is something we must support financially, but also marketing it so that kids understand that it is so important to have skilled workers in our industries. And we can capture them even at high school, because oftentimes they may think, that's, a pathway for somebody else. But if we can equip them and start bringing them into those trades and in a pathway that works for them, they will be skilled and they will be ready. I am also, one to make sure that when we take a look at just the pictures that we show on social media, I'm always marketing a female welder. Why? Because we have shortages of females in certain industries.
Fair enough.
And so I really want to capture what types of things that we can do better in the education space. And again, there are going to be lots of families that are going to go to universities and colleges, as we already know. But we have to capture families who are going to go into the trades. And by doing that, we build them up. We bring them into a pathway that works for their families.
I want to go back to something we talked about a little bit ago, and that is, our district's too top-heavy with administration. And this is another thing that's been talked about for years when it comes to Arizona schools, consolidating school districts. We have a lot of school districts, but that doesn't really work for the two school districts I went to in Arizona, which was Kayenta on the Navajo Nation, and then Page, which has one high school. They both have one high school each. Wow. I think Page has 2 elementary schools now and a middle school. But those are small districts. They can't really, they're an hour and a half apart, right? These schools. So it doesn't really work for them. But do we need to talk about consolidating school districts, at least in the metro areas of Tucson and Phoenix?
Yes, and I've actually been a staff member of these discussions of consolidating districts, and it not only allows for greater efficiencies, it means that you are able to have that academic achievement in a way that is more beneficial for the student, because what's happening is you have tiny little districts all over, and it actually gets very, very complicated. educated. And one of the things that was the pushback, of course, is, but I don't want to lose my job. Well, you don't necessarily have to lose a job in consolidation efforts. You just like a business. You consolidate, everybody still keeps their job. We're just going to bring this all together so that it's more efficient, more effective for that student. It always comes back to academic achievement.
Well, and administrators could always move into the classroom too, right? Like
That's right.
Back to the classroom. That could happen. But then also the flip side of that, aren't you losing kind of that local control? Because school districts are really the smallest form of government we have in the United States. And so it's, it might be much harder for me to get to that microphone at that school board meeting if it's a school district that has, 100,000 kids as opposed to the 30,000 kids that, my kids go to a school district in.
It's very important to always have a very close community and that access for that communication within those local governing board members. And I think that can still be done. I mean, look at where we are in technology. You don't have to physically attend the meeting anymore.
That is true.
You can be in the comfort of your own Zoom meeting or whatever they call WebEx, and be able to provide your recommendations or your testimony publicly in any way. So we do have to keep up with what is happening, and we also have to take a fiscal look at really what is more effective. But it comes down to the bottom line, which is what is best for kids. How are they learning? How are they achieving? Are they getting to that marker? And they're not today. We also are losing out on so many individuals who are looking at Arizona possibly to move, because one of the first things they Google is what's the education system look like in this state.
Right.
And I have personally spoken to individuals who were 50-50. Once they took a look at where we were compared to whatever job they were looking at in another state, they're like, well, and we shouldn't be in that mediocre position.
Right.
We are better than that. And I think for far too long we've kicked that, down the road, and we are in a position now as a growing state, as one that has all of these wonderful aspects to continue to grow. We need to do better on the education front.
And then one more controversial issue, and then we'll probably wrap up here, because I know you got a lot of people to talk to as you announce running for superintendent of public instruction. How about English immersion?
English immersion,
yes. Do you agree with the current superintendent, Tom Horne, that immersion's the proper way to teach English to non-English speaking students?
Absolutely. 100%. You really have to get individuals who want to learn the language of English into a classroom where 100% of the time is spoken in English. And many students, unfortunately, go into a Spanish-speaking class because they're Spanish-speaking. And we know this. This is the data. How are they going to learn English if they are in a fully immersed Spanish-speaking class?
I thought, and I'm a little confused because I thought that was the law now in Arizona, that you have to be in English immersion.
Yes, however,
correct?
the state legislature, about maybe 8 years ago, they changed it. So, yes, it initially started where it was 100% of that day in that classroom. But they softened those regulations within the policies. And I think that it really works better when you're 100% in that English immersion classroom.
It does sound a little scary, though, doesn't it, for the non-English speaking kids the first time they're walking to class? They have no idea what's going on.
Well, you can imagine that in any type of setting, they're going to be, in an unusual situation on that first day. But as teachers know how to teach, and we give them full credit, they will bring that comfort level to them in a way that is meaningful so that they can achieve English proficiency as soon as they can.
You're the offspring of immigrants who didn't come to America speaking English, right? Or did they?
My parents were born and raised in America.
Right, but
my mom actually taught. She was born and raised in Phoenix.
It was your grandfather or your grandmother was.
My grandparents came to Arizona, and they spoke English, obviously, but they learned it on their own. And it was very important for my mom as she was teaching in these South Phoenix schools. She had those students who did not have English as their first language. Did she speak to them in Spanish? No, she spoke to them in English. And by their end of their first semester, they were reading at wonderful proficiency because of that immersion that she taught. But the other thing that happened, which was sad, was that particular principal within that school at that time saw a last name that would have been ethnic-sounding Spanish and moved them into the Spanish-speaking classroom at that time in that scenario. I remember it.
Wow.
And that was unfortunate. But what was the reason? Because that student got more funding if they were considered ESL. And it was an individual on the back side of what you were talking about with immersion. They were actually going in, they were speaking English, and they were going into a full Spanish-speaking immersion classroom because of their last name. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
And so if it's about funding, we really need to fix a lot of problems out there.
Anything else I didn't touch on that you are you going to make your campaign for superintendent about?
I am planning on talking about education all around. Again, we don't just talk about K through 12 grades. We talk about that pathway for higher education and preparing our future workforce. So it's very important for us to take a look at that comprehensive education plan. And achievement is where we need to go. But people can visit my website at kimberlyyee.com for more information about me, my background in education, but also just about my plans ahead.
All right. As a former political consultant, good job getting your website in.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
You did a good job on that. All right. Thank you so much for watching the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharp, and we'll see you really soon.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharp. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.